We are in Luxembourg, in Mudam, Contemporary Art Museum, and this is the first solo exhibition of the American artist Tourmaline. Tourmaline is a transgender artist, and I'm very curious to hear why Luxembourg Art Museum exhibit this artist.
Maybe we have to go back to this, the context of the Art Prize of Baloise. That's an art prize given during the art fair in Basel. So it's dedicated to the statement section, focusing on young emerging artists. And she won the prize last year, and therefore we had the chance to get a major work from her into the Mudam collection. The work is a film called Pollinator, and we are organizing this year a first solo show in Europe. I would say it's very important to welcome artists and artwork from the one like Pollinator into the collection, because it expands the scope of the collection somehow. We know that at the moment everything is moving, and maybe we are now looking at artists but also community that weren't so visible until now. And of course Tourmaline is an artist for many years. She had a lot of activities before being an artist. She was a community organizer, so being involved in various kind of social activities. But at the same time, she's also coming from a family where activism, political commitment was very important. So she has this sensibility about social justice and also making Black community and queer community more visible than they are today, but she deals with that at various levels. She's a writer, so she did a kind of anthology, for example. She's, as I said, an activist. She was involved in various kind of organization, and she's also an artist working with photography and film. And the work she's doing is very powerful and also speaks to everyone, I would say. So that's important for Mudam, because it's a collection of a museum rooted somewhere, I would say in Europe, in the western part, but at the same time open to the rest of the world. And that is also the mission of the museum, to be able to welcome various kind of work and to have a wider spectrum, or as wide as possible, let's say it like that.
New York at the time when Tourmaline is active was the very center of the art universe. Of course, everyone visited New York to see the famous trees, the famous museums, the famous studios in the city. And of course, Central Park is also very important in the history of the city. But actually, what Tourmaline described, one of her work, is about the Seneca village, which was a Black community in the Central Park. It disappeared in the 1930s. How can you connect with all of these artworks? And needless to say, there are Agnes Dénes, wheat field in the Central Park as an artwork. So there's a long history. And maybe you have some kind of favorite or kind of selection what you are interested in.
That's very interesting what you mentioned, the fact that in fact some of the works of Tourmaline are really connected to some specific places. For example, Seneca, the district you are talking about, it's in a film where one of the central characters is Mary Jones. Mary Jones is someone that existed. I mean, she's known in the story of New York as one of the first Black transgender women. And so Tourmaline is also working on this historical figure, and it's always connected to some places. In the case of Mary Jones, it's really Seneca. In the film Pollinator, one of the main characters is a tribute to Marsha P. Johnson. She was an activist from the late 60s. She died early 90s. And all her fight was evolving around a street, Christopher Street, where she created and finding a place where people could gather. So we can see that everyone is connected to some places, and these places are very symbolic. For Tourmaline, it says a lot about what she is today, because she had in mind, she bears the memory of all these past fights, and that she somehow make it today perceptible. And of course, I think we are all rooted somewhere. But what is very important with Tourmaline is that she has the possibility to also welcome some other people and to make feeling that everyone has to feel his own way into the world with confidence, and to keep in mind that we are coming from somewhere and then we are going towards something else also, and that we, as a part of the community, are building that. So this relation, this close relation, it's a kind of personal, emotional, but also historical relationship to some specific places.
If you're talking about a little about Luxembourg itself, earlier I talked with Alex Redding, and he mentioned that Luxembourg is quite expensive for an art living, and especially this museum is really the center and the top of the hill, so it's kind of one of the best positions in the city. So what do you think, how can this museum evaluate this?
It's very symbolic, because we are on the place of an old fortress, and where we are, we can see outdoors, and then we can see the rooms of this fortress. So the city was a fortress, so it seemed that it was not possible to get in. But of course the fortress was erased when the country became independent. And somehow now, for the, I would say, the last maybe 2 decades, the city and the country is more and more open. It's a small country, a small city, surrounded by neighbors like Belgium, Germany and France. This country has already have a place, an important place on the European scene, despite its small scale. And now everything is growing very fast. So there are more and more people arriving into the country and the city. The whole society, of course, is evolving with that. And being a contemporary art museum is very important, because a museum dealing with contemporary art is also dealing with hot topics. What is debated, what is discussed in the society, we are kind of reflecting that, we are kind of echoing that. And of course, having a museum of contemporary art in a country whose society is evolving very fast is important somehow. It reflects also the fact that the world is welcomed into that country, and also that there is place for debate, for question, for interrogation. So it's a place where visitors are invited to perhaps think differently.
In general, when we talk about LGBTQI movement and the feminism and the minorities maybe itself, I think in the Western world, I talked with many artists in Paris. It's kind of they have no big problem about being a female artist, for example. They can be exhibited, can be work and so on, and even if curators can work and stuff like that. There are more problems on the east side, but that's a bit far. But also in Paris, I was very surprised when there was an LGBTQ bookshop, Violetta, and it was closed in the last year, unfortunately. So how do you can describe maybe the situation of a female artist or a minority artist or LGBTQ or trans artist position now in here?
Well, you made a difference between the western part and the eastern part of Europe. That's true that within the society, probably women and girls feel more and more confident, but still, if you are looking at the collection of the museum, the part of the female artist is still quite low. Of course, we are all trying to get a better balance, but it takes time. It takes time, before you get to that balance. So in fact, we are still in this prospect that at some point we have to be aware that collections program needs to be more open. We have to kind of a positive action on that. And that's true for female artists, but of course from artists coming from minorities. I think now the society is more aware that we can hear some other voices. And I think in Luxembourg, such as perhaps other capital city in Europe, you still have to make that possible. It is not going to be natural, it has to be somehow supported.
When we talk about the collection, I think it's very interesting because you have the greatest names, I think, but you also have young artists. Of course, there's a kind of mix. How can any institution decide on what to have on collection, because there are so many artists.
Maybe the most important point is to highlight the fact that the collection is not built at once. It's really the succession of various layers. It takes time. In the case of the Mudam collection, it's a pretty young collection. We started mid-90s. Still now is more than 25 years, but it's young if you compare to other institutions. So of course the constraint of the time it starts is one point, one parameter. What we can observe also is that, going back to the starting point, the core of the collection was really focusing on this idea of Europe, of course Luxembourg, but of Germany, France, UK, and maybe the western part of the world, so North America. And with this very traditional medium, painting, sculpture, photos. And then expanded in terms of medium, in terms of practice, including design, fashion, but also film, moving image, installation. That was really the first step. Then after, it expanded also in terms of geography, being able perhaps to be more open to South America, Asia, Africa. Of course, if you look at the figures, you can understand that this collection is anchored in Europe, but you know, it's also a question of evolution, and right now the way the selection is done is definitely not the same thing as it was done 15 years ago. I would say today the institutions, the museal institutions, are taking care of having a look to the balance and trying also to kind of make it more equitable in terms of representation. It's always a matter of discussions, also the way the program is done. So the museum is the first institution for contemporary art in Luxembourg, so it has the role to have a look back on art history, but at the same time to be very prospective and have a look on emerging artists. And I would say the collection is symbolic and representative of this conjunction between the past and the future somehow, you know, because we have also the mission to get the visitor more acquainted with the art history, and at the same time to be connected to actual and contemporary issues.
Thank you very much for the discussion.
You're welcome.